So I have here the R Studio interface, right? And um, I've probably been trying to convince you to use R for a couple of years now, and um, some of you probably find it vaguely interesting. Some of you probably absolutely hate it, and some of you are willing to do it, right? I really want to stress that for modern science, learning how to write code is really, really important. It's not to say you can't get by without doing it. You absolutely can, right? But more and more of the cutting edge science that has been done in all areas relies on this kind of skill. And I give some examples on the online content, but fundamentally, there's all kinds of data that you cannot work with just using Excel, right? You cannot at all work with just using a pen and paper, which is not to say that there's not some that you can, and some of them you maybe have to interact with a computer to get the sort of the data to come out. But really, the computer is nothing more than a fancy start button. But in general, every year, science is depending more and more on this. You cannot deal with RNA-seq data sets without a good knowledge of computers. You cannot deal with recordings of thousands of neurons for hours without a good knowledge of computers. You cannot understand how gene networks interact without a good knowledge of computers. So all we're here to do, our primary goal, we're going to learn a few facts about some data analysis, right? But we're really just here to kind of get you comfortable in writing a little bit of code, and it's not a big deal, okay? So here we have the R console, the R Studio front end. We have a console down here in the bottom left. Exactly what's going on your screen and some of the other windows, I don't know. Probably up here is probably blank. Over here, if you've never installed R before, it's probably blank. You might have a window like this, which just shows some files somewhere on your computer. It doesn't matter. We're mostly interested down here. That's where we're spending a lot of our time, down here in the console, where we can just type in R codes however we want. All right. Now, R is a programming language. A lot of people think it's like something to do with statistics, and R has a lot of statistics built into it, and it sort of became popular because it was a free programming language with lots of statistics built into it. But it is a general purpose programming language first. Okay, so um, what can we do with a programming language? Well, the most important concept, or maybe it's not the most important concept, but it's one of the foundational concepts in programming, is the variable. What is variable? A variable is just a box that can store data. Okay, it has a label on it. That's the variable's name, and what it contains can be kind of anything a computer can store. It could be one number, could be 1,000 numbers, could be a picture, could be a sound file, who knows, right? It's just like a brown cardboard box, could contain anything, just hard to tell until we look at it. And how do we make a variable in R? Well, there are a bunch of different ways, but the easiest way is we just start typing something. So I'm going to call this my var, my var for my variable. That is way too small to see. Let us go to tools, and we're going to go to global options. Yes, and we're going to go to appearance, and we're going to change this to like 16 point, and we're going to apply that. And my word, that's big. But at least now you can see what I'm saying. All right, my var. And we're going to put into that 2 plus 2. All right, so what do we have? Here we have our soon to be variable's name, my var, right? We have this symbol. This is the uh, less than symbol and a dash, which is supposed to look like an arrow. It's going in, right? And we have the right-hand side of this statement, and that is 2 plus 2. In computers, what they'll always do is everything on the right-hand side gets calculated first, some result comes, and then that is chucked into my var. So if I press enter, that is now done, all right? Computer did it, there was no problems. Now, when I talk about how the right-hand side was executed and the result was put in, right? So my var now contains, well, it's going to contain 4. So if I go print my var and press enter, I get 4, right? So it didn't store 2 plus 2. it calculates, it finishes, it works on the right hand side, gets some result, and then puts it in. So right hand side first, then left hand side. What have I done here? I've written print, I've opened these round brackets, these parentheses, and then I wrote my var. So print is a function, okay? Functions are probably the other foundational part of programming, all right? Variables and functions. What we've said to this print function is something that's built into R's head. It is some set of code that it knows how to execute. And we've given it some input or an argument, right? So print is the function, we've provided the argument myvar, and the arguments are surrounded in those parentheses, all right? So we now know about variables. They're just boxes to hold data. Data can be of any kind. We have functions like print. We're going to learn a few more of them, hopefully not too many. And we know that we can put different kinds of variables, different kinds of data into a variable. So one of the most widely used type of variable or type of data that is within a variable, depending on how you want to think about it, is the data frame. Data frames are kind of the de facto standard data type in R, and we can go and get one, right? So we're going to go df for data frame, and we're going to go like that. So we're going to put something into it and we're going to call another function. This function is called read.csv. All right, a bunch of stuff came up. These are like suggestions from RStudio. There are two here. We just want that one. We didn't need to click that. We could have also gone, I don't know if it'll still come up, read.csv, and I just could have open my parentheses, and it would have just been happy with that. It gives us some tips about some things we might want to type in here. We might want to provide it with a file. We might want to tell it whether this file has a header, blah, 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 blah. We don't need to worry about all these right now. So we're just going to open some quote marks. Note that RStudio finished them off for us because we always need to surround any string of characters in those quote marks. That is to say, we don't want R to try and interpret this as code. This is just words, right? And so what it's going to be is it's going to be a web address, http://billconnolly.net/data/sleep.csv. All right. And we're going to press enter. And if I've typed everything in right, we get no errors. And hopefully something has happened. So what did we do? Let's think about it again. We had this function read.csv. It takes some argument, some input, and that is the string of characters. It's a string because it's surrounded by quote marks. This is not code. This is just just letters, all right? And it can then interpret those letters, and it does something with it. Now, I don't know how read.csv goes off into the internet, finds this file that I put up on a website. I don't know how it does it. I don't need to know. That's the whole beauty of how functional programming works, that each of these little functions are like little black boxes. We don't know how they work. We don't care how they work. We just provide some input. They give us something back, or sometimes they don't even give us something back. And that's all. We just need to know how do we format the input to make the function do what we want. All right. Now, unfortunately, that does mean sometimes you do actually have to learn how the inside of functions work, but not necessarily like this one. You just give it a address on your computer or a URL, and it goes off and gets it. Okay, and what has it gotten? Well, we can find with the head function. Head of our data frame, right? So the function is head. We're going to provide it data frame, df, that variable we just created, and we press enter. And what do we see? We see the start of our data frame. It looks like it has 3 columns, right? A data frame is basically just like an Excel spreadsheet. It has named columns, okay? And here we see we've got 6 rows. That's what head does. It gets you the first 6 rows, because you might have a data frame that has 10 million rows and you don't want it to print out all of them because you'll be there all day. So just the first 6 rows, please, just so I can get a feel for the data. And what we can see here is we have these 3 columns, one called extra, one called drug, and one called ID. And what these are is, what is the extra amount of sleep subject 1 got relative to a reference amount of sleep when they are on this drug L-hyoscine. Okay, so this person slept 0.7 of an extra hour, and this person slept minus 1.6 less, 1.6 hours less when they were on this drug. Okay, not a super exciting data set, but it's nice and small and simple and fun. Okay, so we've got our data set. It's a data frame. Columns, it's just like an Excel spreadsheet. All right. What can we do with it? Well, what we can do is we can access a specific column. We do that by putting in the variable's name, and then we go dollar, and we've got some suggestions for us here, and the answers we might want is extra. We could have just typed it in. I clicked because I'm lazy, and what we get is just that column. See, there's the 0.7, 0.7 minus 1.6, la 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 la. Right? So now we've got just the column of the extra column. We could also get the drug column, dollar frame drug. Okay, and this data frame dollar column name approach, very common, very useful, very easy to understand, right? As soon as you see the dollar sign, you know somebody is just trying to pull out a column from a data frame. You can probably easily imagine that we might want to take the average of this, right, to see whether people are sleeping more or less. You can see here that the two different drugs, we've got hyoscine and hyoscamine. Okay, so this is pretty useful. Um, but there is a slightly more general purpose way of trying to access the rows and columns of the data. And that is done by going data frame, open square brackets, right? Not the round brackets, but the square brackets. And we say which row we want and which column we want. All right, so one, we want the first row, and in that first row, we want, sorry, the first row, and then we want the first column, right? So this should be 0.7, and it is. All right, so we can go down to the second one if we wanted by going to that. It makes sense. We can go across a row now. We could go to 2, 2. So this should be hyoscine. It is, all right? So that's pretty handy. It's not quite as obvious what's going on, right? When you go the dollar frame, dollar drug, data frame, dollar drug, we know data frame, we want a column. You start looking at this, it's less clear, but it is general purpose and it is slightly more powerful. And we'll see some examples of what I mean by that very soon. We can, on the other hand, say, look, I don't want to specify a row. I want all of the rows. We just remove that, then we have comma 1. All right. So that is exactly the same as going data frame dollar extra. Get the exact same information out. So we can specify by the column number or by the column title. What else can we do? Well, we can also, just so that this sort of sinks in a little bit, we can specify the row. So we might want the first row and every column, so we don't specify. Boom, there's the first row. That's the first data point. Pretty handy. Uh, Something that you can do with this approach, we're using the square brackets, that you can't do with when you're doing the dollar column name, is you can say, give me everything but, right? So you might say, look, this data frame is all well and good, but this ID column is pretty useless. So I'm going to say, look, I want every row, but I do not want, the third column, right? Minus the third. Give it to me minus the third column. There we go. Now we've got the whole thing without the third column. We could also say, look, I want the first to second column. All right. So that gives me the exact same thing. So just so we can see that, if I go 2 full colon 3, now I get the second and third. That this notation 2 to 3. This is actually what is called like a literal statement. So R directly knows what this means. So if I press this, it gives me the number 2 to 3. What does that mean? Well, if I go 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So R can directly interpret 1 to 10 as the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so in the same way, when we're doing this, it just directly goes, oh, that's number 2, that's number 3, I know what's going on. So that's data frames. You can use the dollar column name, or you can use the square brackets and specify the row and columns, and that's very helpful. But sometimes you don't need something so complicated. All right, you don't need to know, um, you don't want a bunch of rows and columns. You just want a list of numbers. All right. And so this is where a vector comes in. All right. And vectors are in essentially all programming languages, so it's worth including them. We're going to be using them a little bit very soon, so let's chuck one out. And how do we make one? Well, we can go like myVec, so we're making a new variable. What we're going to put in it is something with this C function. All right, C stands for combine. I used to thought it stood for concatenate, but it doesn't. It stands for combine, and we're going to combine some numbers. So let's combine 1, 2, 3, and 10. All right, so this function C has 4 arguments, and these are the numbers we want to combine into a vector. So if I press enter, now we have myVec is created. If I go myVec and I press enter, there you see it, 1, 2, 3, 10. Okay, not very exciting. I appreciate that. It's worth noting that we can access them, right, pretty easily. So if we use the same square brackets, myVec 4, I want the 4th element in that list. We get the number 10. Importantly, we can add things onto it. So the last element right now is 5. So if I say myVec, sorry, the last element is the 4th element. So if I go 5 and I put in, 22, now when I print out myVec, the whole thing, I see 22 on the end. All right, so these are two important kinds of data types in R, the vector and the data frame. We didn't talk about how you would make a data frame, but we can see how we can download files off the internet and get our own data frame. And we talked about some basic syntax, right? So we use that arrow symbol to put contents into variables. We talked about how you can use the $sign to access specific columns, and you can use the square brackets to access specific elements. In a data frame, you can put in 2 numbers to specify the row and the column. While in a vector, because it's just a list, you just need to say what order it is. And if you want to imagine vectors as rows or columns, that's basically fine. They're one or they're the other. They don't have a specific orientation in R.